Convene as committee of the whole. The next item on our agenda is the issuance of park improvement bonds. Jan, thank
Good
you.
evening, Councilmember Prince and members of the council. If you recall, the city council established a Parks Citizens Advisory Committee last January, and their mission was to identify important gaps in the city's parks, trails, and community facilities, and to make recommendations for additional improvements. That committee met 9 times between January and May of this year and came back with a recommendation for $70 million in investments in parks. And these were intended to make improvements to achieve the city's vision for parks in the community. As an alternative recommendation, in case the council didn't feel that this was the optimal time to do so, they proposed $14.5 million in park improvements that would help to maintain the existing parks, trails, and community facilities. On August 6th, you'll remember that EMC Research came and gave you some information about a citizen poll. And then on September 10th, the council voted to provide a funding package through a bond that would provide approximately $14.5 million in project proceeds. And at that time, council directed staff to come back with appropriate legislation for that. So we've been working with Pacifica Law Group and who is our bond counsel, and Piper Jaffray, our financial advisor, on the preparation of an ordinance and the structure for bond issuance. We're back here tonight at the Committee of the Whole with that legislation, and we're happy to answer any questions. It does authorize us to go forward to issue debt sometime within the next year to provide proceeds of approximately $14.5 million. So I'm happy to answer questions, and we also have Deanna Gregory from Pacifica Law Group, our bond counsel, and Shannon Thompson, who is with Piper Jaffray, our financial advisor. So with it, I will turn it back over to you for
Any questions from
discussion.
Don?
Well, first of all, I'll reiterate what I said before. I'm all in favor of this bond issue, but I still think we need to list the projects either before we pass the bonds so we know where it goes. And so my question is, on page 7 of the bond issue, it lists, and I apologize, I left my glasses, but this is a park plans identify certain capital needs at city parks, trails, and recreational facilities, including but not limited to the construction, improvement, development, and equipping of playgrounds, turf areas, ball fields, sports courts, multiple use, and walking trails, parking facilities, and other parks, trails, and recreational improvements, together the projects that will serve the community and city programs. The projects are to be more fully described in the plans and specification prepared by and filed with the city are hereby approved. Well, first of all, we don't have that list, so I don't know how we can approve it. And secondly, my question is, and Jan, you stated it so well, that the bond committee, the committee for the bond issue, listed the things that needed to be repaired and fixed in our parks. Would this allow, the way this is written, would it allow for the purchase of property? And I guess that's why I asked the bond counsel to be here.
And the original intent is to stay the course with that $14.5 million list that we provided council earlier, and that comes straight out of the park plan. We are currently reviewing that list just to make sure that all the I's are dotted and T's are crossed in terms of what the IRS code requires us to do to be able to categorize them as capital improvements. But with that said, I probably should let Deanna Gregory respond to whether or not property could potentially be included or not. Yeah.
Perfect.
Whatever you feel comfortable
Oh,
with.
right here's great. Happy to join you. Hi, thank you. I'm Deanna Gregory, partner at Pacifica Law Group. Thanks for inviting me here tonight for the discussion of the ordinance. To answer your question specifically to the property, to acquisition of property, so long as it's a capital expenditure that could be capitalized, will be capitalized for the city's purposes, as well as a capital expenditure under federal tax code, then assuming that these bonds are issued as tax exempt obligations, and that would be a proper expense or proper expenditure of these funds, if that project is included in this $14.5–15 million. You'll see that in that same section that you were just reading, if you look down 2 paragraphs, there's another sentence that says the city will determine the exact specifications for the projects, as well as the components and the timing and the order and the manner. And then the city may alter, make substitutions to, and amend the projects. That's intended to help capture the notion that there are various projects within this park plan, and that the bonds are being approved now, but knowing that the projects themselves will be subject to the actual plans and specs that are approved by the city.
And I would just add that it is fully our intent, and Kelly Beamer can speak to this as well, it is our intent to come back and talk to you about those projects before we proceed with any of this.
I guess my concern is that, and because some of us may not be here by the time we get through with this, and that the original intent, as I understand for this small, was, and then I'll use Coulon as the example. Coulon needs a lot of expensive work, and we really need to get it done. But I would hate to see that gets diverted at some point. And my understanding is, I know there's no intention to do that, but there could be somebody else, some other arm twisting, and it get changed. And that's why I just want something fairly definite before we pass a bond issue. And I guess I'll continue on with my questions. The other question that I have, and thank you, Jan, for letting us know that we're going to get a $14.5 million, but we also have to pay $7.5 million worth of interest, and as you said, so totally what we're looking at paying back is $22.5 million, and we're going to raise our levy lift. And my question is, the levy lift that you are proposing, is that going to be covered $22.5 million or just the $14 million?
That levy lid lift will cover the whole amount of the debt service payments, including the interest.
Okay.
Any other questions from council? So I know we got the list earlier this year, the major maintenance list. Can we resend that out to council, please?
We certainly can do
Thank
that.
you.
And with the understanding that if it isn't on that list, it
We're
won't
not
be.
going to do it.
No.
It will not be spent.
Yep.
That's all I'm asking
Yeah.
for, and I don't think that is
I have no problem with that.
I have no problem
too
with that
much to
either.
ask for.
Go ahead, Kelly.
I just wanted to reiterate, Councilman Person, absolutely, the list that you received is the 6-year improvement plan. It's not purchasing. It is to take care of our current and existing infrastructure, like you mentioned, Coulon and other equipment and things within our park system.
I have a question.
Go ahead.
So if grant money comes in the interim to cover some of these projects, if by some chance we get money from the county to do park maintenance and improvement, do we then defer the money to some other project, or do we just not issue the rest of the bonds? I think there was an option to do it in pieces.
We would be back to council to talk about what we would do, how we would change that out so that we would have your approval if that were to happen. I'm not entirely sure that the type of major maintenance and improvements that we're talking about here are the kinds that are grant eligible per se. But we would, if there were change and we did get a grant, we would definitely be back to talk to you about that.
That brings up another question.
Go ahead, Don.
Sorry. Sorry. And I guess one of the things for the bond council is, in a perfect world, we get $14.5 million, and we cover all the projects that we list, and we do it for 14 million, can we use then that $500,000 that's left over to pay down the interest?
Not to pay down the interest, no. You could, if you have extra proceeds that are available after all the projects have been financed, the money could be used for other projects. So for example, if the city has other park-related projects, or because these are limited tax general obligation bonds, they legally under Washington law can be used for any lawful city purpose. And so the council could, in essence, repurpose them. And free up operating funds other ways, and use the money for other capital expenditure or for other expenditures. That's definitely the preference that we would recommend, is to use the money for good capital projects, but you could use it, and legally you could use it towards debt service on the principal side.
Okay. Thank you.
Any other questions from council? All right, I've got a committee report. Committee of Whole recommends concurrence in staff recommendation to approve the issuance of councilmatic park improvement bonds generating approximately $14.5 million in project proceeds funded by a property tax levy. Any issues with this?
Could we have the sentence in there that we'll have that list before we approve it?
We can definitely get it to you before final reading.
Can you guys send it out tonight? I know we have it, but if we can just send it out again tonight between
We can do that.
this and the council meeting, I'd appreciate it.
Yeah.
All right. All right, thank you, guys. We're gonna move on. Legislative priorities. Doug, Preety. My damn pen is all over.
No signal.
Someone help with that.
I gotta go get my gun.
It probably worked.
That's better. Good evening, Council President, Council members. I'm Preeti Sridhar, here with Doug Levy to present to you our 2019 legislative priorities. We're going to do things a little different this year. In addition to our state legislative priorities, we also have our regional and federal agenda that we're going to present. As you know, as of May of this year, Doug's scope of work with us expanded to include working on a broader scope of intergovernmental relations, to include working with county, sound transit, and other state priorities, and also expanding to our federal agenda. So today he's going to be doing the lion's share of the presentation to you to address these issues, and also give you an emphasis on what we're looking at for our state agenda. There is no agenda bill that we'll present later today. This is just a briefing so that it's an opportunity for you to get a sense of what we're looking at as our priorities, but also an opportunity, if you have any feedback for us, we'll come to you later in the year with once we get your input, with a legislative agenda for you to adopt. So this is just a briefing for the committee for you to get your input as well. So without anything further, Doug Levy with our proposed agenda. I will go.
Thanks, Preeti, and good evening, Mr. President and council members and staff. So as Preeti said, we're here to give you an overview of the agendas, plural, and not meant to be anything adopted tonight, but would love your input. The bulk of our presentation will focus on the state legislative agenda, but you do have copies of the regional agenda where we talk about our work trying to help shape decisions with King County Metro, Sound Transit, funding opportunities through Puget Sound Regional Council and the like. And additionally, on the federal side, we have a pretty compact agenda that talks about some areas where we hope to pursue things that can be value added for the city, and where Renton can play an active role. That federal list is by no means meant to be all inclusive or capturing everything going on at the federal level, but more a list of those things Renton can be more active in and directly influence. In terms of the proposed state legislative agenda, some context and landscape we wanted to give you. Remember, we're entering into an odd-numbered year, and that equals a longer 105-day session. Through a bit of an oddity, it doesn't start until January 14th. Under the Constitution, the legislature starts the second Monday of the year, and that's normally much earlier, so later start to the session. There will be 3 biennial budgets. The state silos them into operating, capital, and transportation. We're walking into a situation where, at least before November 6th, there were very slim majorities in the Senate and the House for Democrats. You know, if you look at some of the primary results, the conventional wisdom tells you that those majorities may grow, particularly in the House. I added here a note of caution that conventional wisdom can and often is wrong, so obviously we'll get a much more reliable snapshot after tomorrow's general election results come in. As far as some major issues and challenges the state has that we need to be aware of in crafting our own agenda, remember that the state is really under the gun with the mental health system and the troubles at Western State Hospital, and we will see the governor introduce a fairly major legislative package to establish more community-based facilities for mental health. And we've already seen Senate Republicans offer a package of ideas, including a $500 million bond bill. In terms of culverts for fish passage, the U.S. Supreme Court declined to act on a recent appeal by the state. That means the state is absolutely on the hook for $2.4 billion in repairs and removals. You know, we could see locals be next under the cloud on that, so that'll be a major issue for the legislature. And then you're getting a presentation after us on affordable housing. Affordable housing and homelessness will continue to be top of mind for the legislature and be a major issue. And then if we just skip to the next page, yes, the legislature has now passed its legal test under McCleary, but I think we're going to see a lot of funding pressures remain on K through 12, and we saw a number of either strikes or near strikes in local school districts. So how to accommodate students and whether the whole property tax-based way of paying for McCleary gets redone is going to be a big issue. And then partly depending on what we see happen with the Initiative 1631 on carbon, there are some key legislators talking about a package of investments in transportation, and we'll see how that goes after the election. And then if you zero down to cities and local governments, we are really sort of ground zero for the issues with affordable housing and homelessness and mental health, so you'll see that reflected on our agenda. We continue as a group of local governments to face infrastructure challenges. Councilmember Perez, I think you alluded to that the other day in committee, that it's really one of the weak links of the Growth Management Act is we have all these areas expected to absorb growth, and we really haven't necessarily had the infrastructure funding come along to deal with that targeted growth, primarily because a 3-year study the legislature asked the Ruckelshaus Center to do doesn't finish until midway through 2019. We won't see that so much as an issue next session, but the following one. And then transportation continues to be a big issue, certainly in our community and around the central Puget Sound. And economic development tools, we don't have as many as some other states have, so that's on the horizon. And even while the economy has been good, the budget pressures and the potential threats to revenue distributions don't really go away. And we know that there's, at some point in the near future, probably going to be a flattening of the economy coming up. So with all of those, sort of taking all those things into account, we looked at the legislative agenda for Renton. We reviewed some of what's still pending in the legislature, made a point of talking to departments throughout the city. We think it still makes sense to use the buckets that we've had and that you've approved in the agendas before on public safety, quality of life, fiscal stability, and investing in transportation. We're putting before you this session 2 capital budget requests, I think reflective of the fact that this city is taking on a lot of growth, has a lot of projects in front of it. And similarly, you'll see 2 transportation requests that we are queuing up. And again, as we talked about earlier, we're covering key priorities this evening, but there's a larger agenda. We're open to your questions and feedback on that. So going through our topics in order, first with public safety, at the Washington State Patrol Forensics Lab, one of the things there's a real backlog on is the testing of the sexual assault and rape kits that are really critical to helping all of us at the local level resolve criminal investigations. So there will be a Washington State Patrol operating and capital budget requests. A lot of that centered on fortifying Vancouver as a lab to try and get the catch-up work done. You'll recall you all got a presentation on this a few months back at Council Committee of the Whole. And then at the Basic Law Enforcement Academy, while the legislature has been allocating some additional funding the last couple of years, there's going to be, again, a real strong effort to take the base budget maintenance level up from 10 classes to 19. And at the legislative level, take 17 state-funded classes up to 19. Then in terms of mental health, which we talked about earlier, Renton was a key player in helping pass a bill last session that authorized co-response teams of law enforcement and mental health professionals. And with what's known as the True Blood Settlement for Disability Rights Washington's specifically mentioning those teams, there is going to be an effort to seek as much as $10 million for the mental health teams. And we thought that, given the issues we're facing in Renton, was well worth strong support from our side. And then we and other cities want to work with SCORE on increasing the $85 a day maximum that the Department of Corrections pays to house state prisoners. There's actually a more gross inadequacy than the $124 for on average that we mentioned here in the PowerPoint. We just got word from SCORE that the amount that they charge for non-guaranteed beds is more $175 a day, and so the state is actually getting, a deal where they're paying half of what others pay for non-guaranteed beds. So certainly speaks to the need to try and go into the state operating budget and arrive at a more equitable per day deal for the SCORE cities. I would give you a bit of good news that SCORE is trying to negotiate some increases in the amount that they get for prisoners who have to go through mental health and other services. So that's a positive, but we still think this basic per day rate is a key issue. Then on the quality of life side and taking our capital budget items, one of them really springboards off your Civic Corps vision and the idea of taking what is the Burnett Linear Park and establishing a Renton connector where we go further north and bring a bicycle and pedestrian network close to the Cedar River. So we're looking at that as a $2 million request to the 2019 legislature. And really jumping off of the conversation you just had with Community Services and Finances, while you are approving, obviously, the parks maintenance bonding of nearly $15 million, we think in terms of the legislature and asking for some state partnership money, it's appropriate to pull out Coulon because it is such a highly used, regionally used park facility. It may say City of Renton, but we know already from some data we're pulling that that's a very highly used park around the region, not just in the community. And for that reason, we think it makes sense to bring that one to the state and ask for some capital budget assistance. And so we've got that flagged as a $1 million request for the Coulon Park upgrades. And I would add that that's physically in the 41st Legislative District, and we've met with a likely new member of the 41st who's going to be on the House Capital Budget Committee. So we additionally thought, for that reason, this might be a very good project to bring to her. On the affordable housing and homelessness and mental health side, there's going to be continued discussion of a bill that came very close to passing in 2018 but didn't. It was Substitute House Bill 2437, and it would have provided state sales tax credits that could be used and matched at the local level to build new affordable housing units. The way that this bill is shaping up for 2019, it may well provide cities an ability to get that state sales tax credit match more directly. So we're going to be, we think, very involved in that, and obviously ask for that inclusion on the legislative agenda. And then on the fiscal stability side, these will look very familiar to you as old standbys on the agenda, but protecting the state shared revenues that we depend upon and working to ensure that there's no takeaways or diversions in those revenues that flow down from the state to the local level, whether that's liquor or municipal criminal justice, marijuana, or the like. And then lastly, on the transportation side, we've got a few key issues here. One is that we now have a really critical go year on the Interstate 405 corridor, where unless the legislature authorizes the managed lanes, or what we think of the hot lanes, between Renton and Bellevue, it will really throw off the whole timing and syncing up of those lanes with bus rapid transit coming on the 405 corridor by 2024. So we flagged that as a critical issue. It looks like what's likely to be brought to the legislature is a bill that on an omnibus basis authorizes the tolling and managed lanes networks on several corridors. It's also very possible that the legislature will look at bonding of toll proceeds due to some of the infrastructure improvements along the 405 corridor that have to be made, particularly at the north end, to accommodate the managed lanes and make them work and meet some of the metrics that are in state law. If that occurs and the legislature is looking at 25-year bonding of toll proceeds, we think it makes sense to bring our legislators some potential Renton investments within that kind of a 25-year payout. And one of the ones we've raised and will continue to raise with our legislators is the potential importance of a connection at 405 and North 8th. Right now, the managed lanes network would include an inline station at I-405 and 44th, and a likely station right near 405, 167, what you all think of as the Sound Ford site, but not necessarily any kind of inline access in between, and 405 North 8 could be an important project for that reason. Obviously, no guarantees of what the legislature is going to do here, but we thought it made sense to bring that project up to them as they look at potential bonding of toll proceeds. Then the transportation budget requests we've got flagged here for you. One is to seek about $1.75 million to help with the Williams and Wells improvements related to the whole SR 900 transition from state to local. And then at I-405 and 44th, which I mentioned a moment ago, as the state redoes that interchange and as the inline access is built for ST3, there will be some basic landscaping put into place, but that becomes a very prominent northern gateway for the city of Renton. And one of the things that staff suggested to us, and we've included in the agenda as something we would take to the legislature as a budget request, is to augment what landscaping and signage and gateway features DOT would do, and see if the legislature would be willing to partner on some money to do that, with the knowledge that Renton would have the maintenance responsibilities going forward. So we think that's hopefully a fair deal to talk to our legislators about as part of the budget. So That's a lot of talking from our end, but that's a snapshot of the agendas. Again, we didn't get to every one of the pieces of the regional and federal agendas, but interested in your input there and open to any questions you may have.
Doug, I know in previous years we've done support oppose. Is that going to come later?
That is in the agenda that we've sent over. We didn't cover that in the PowerPoint, but we do have a number of items there, and we can make sure that that's discussed further with you or deal with any questions or input you have.
Any other questions from council? You guys are off the hook. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, affordable housing briefing.
Good evening, Council President and Council members. I'm Paul Hintz with the Department of Community and Economic Development here tonight to provide a briefing on the recommendations of the King County's Regional Affordable Housing Task Force. The task force has been meeting since July of 2017 with the goal of recommending a countywide affordable housing strategy by December of this year. The task force was established by King County and the City of Seattle, but it includes fair representation by Sound Cities Association members, including the City of Renton with our own Councilmember McIrvin. Staff, including myself and Mark Santos Johnson, have provided support for Councilmember McIrvin for the past year and a half or so as the staff working group. And with his approval, I'd like to just jump into a rough outline of the intent of the recommendations and what they call for.
Go for it.
So the recommendations of the task force are not mandates for cities. Rather, the task force recognizes that the housing market in different parts of the county will call for different solutions to preserve and increase the supply of affordable housing. Many of the actions identified in the draft plan are already being implemented by cities to some degree in King County. The intent of the task force is to learn from these programs and policies, identify priority actions, and collaborate to build capacity and expand successful programs to a regional scale. In addition to recommending specific strategies, the task force is recommending a framework for ongoing collaboration among cities and with King County to implement affordable housing strategies and monitor those results. This is proposed to come from a standing committee of the King County Growth Management Planning Council. At its October 24th meeting, the task force discussed setting a 5-year goal for housing preservation and production dramatically above current rates. In the past 5 years, the region has invested roughly $384 million in affordable housing from federal, state, and local sources. These investments have produced or permanently preserved over 2,500 homes per year. The goal set by the task force will serve as basis for measuring the results of the strategies and also in terms of unit production and also in assessing the level of funding needed to accomplish the goals. The recommended strategies of the task force include prioritizing affordable housing within a half-mile of high-capacity transit stations by establishing regional targets for preservation and creation, developing incentives for private development, and possibly securing county funding from bonds against future lodging taxes revenues. Improving tenant protections would be done through collaboration to develop more consistent tenant protections at the statewide and regional level. To address things like just cause eviction, notice of rent increases, and tenant relocation assistance, as well as adopting programs to improve the quality of existing affordable housing, such as rental registration programs. The task force recommends protecting communities of color and low-income communities from displacement. This would be hopefully achieved through improving engagement and with communities of color and low-income communities in the development of housing plans and strategies, and also implementing programs and policies that serve those risk of displacement. The task force also recommends promoting overall housing growth and diversity of housing types by encouraging more diverse housing supply, different types of housing, maybe in single-family zones, for example, exempting certain development fees for affordable housing, and incentivizing affordable housing development by expanding tools for investments in local infrastructure tied to affordability. And then finally, improving community engagement with neighborhoods and residents in planning for these affordable housing strategies through improved coordination with philanthropic, business, and faith communities. Develop collaborative efforts to develop tools and strategies to engage local communities to assist with implementation and change to land use regulations. And finally, create a stakeholder partnership with private sector and faith community to encourage their investment in affordable housing and communicating the need for affordable housing to the broader public. The recommendations of the task force will be discussed at the next Public Issues Committee of the Sound Cities Association on November 14th. And I'd be happy to try and answer any questions that you might have.
Any questions from council? Go ahead, Don.
Well, when you say affordable housing, what is the price range? I mean, there's a whole bunch of versions of what's affordable and.
Sure. So this plan outlines funneling most of the public dollars to those households that are earning less than 50% AMI, and a mix of public dollars and private investments to achieve housing for those in between 50 and 80% AMI. By achieving greater housing production and preservation within those ranges of affordability, it creates opportunities for those earning higher incomes to then have more freedom of housing choices, because it frees up a lot of the existing housing that is tied down in terms of having low vacancy rates.
Go ahead.
I guess I'm kind of a simple mathematician type guy, but when we say, affordable housing, is that a $300,000 house, or are we talking just apartments or duplexes? I mean, in what cost range are we talking about for the people to rent it or to buy it? And
Sure. So those prices, AMI refers to area median income. And so that's a price point that's established for the county. And there would be, based on the recommendations of the task force, there would be varying strategies to accommodate housing across the county, recognizing that we have much different needs for affordability across the county. So there's no one answer to how much that housing unit would cost, but it's all housing types, from apartments to shared housing to single-family houses.
Councilmember McGurven.
Sure, I just wanted to, not really a question, but just to throw in there. First, Don, I think you may find the first page of that 5-year action plan kind of breaks down into those groups. It doesn't give you the hard number maybe you're looking at per se, but it does at least break down kind of the different groups we're looking at as far as how much they earn. And it does kind of provide a basis as far as what is considered affordable and what makes someone cost burdened at each of those levels. So I think it does provide what I love about this plan is that it would be tackling at all different levels. We're not just looking at serving the greatest needs certainly may be at the lower end of the spectrum. As Paul said, we would be tackling this comprehensively so that anyone who may be down renting or down buying would free up available housing stock. I think the big picture in this is looking at the total number that we got to get to. It's a huge number, and I think at our last meeting, the target we set out to do in 5 years we had a couple options, and the one that was selected by the group would be the one that said that we would basically do in that 5 years what we need to do, incrementally each year in order to hit that 244,000 goal. And I'm trying to remember if that was it was more than 4 times what we're doing right now. I'm trying to remember the exact. I don't remember.
I think it was a multiplier of 5. Yeah.
Yeah, it was significantly more than we're already doing. So it is a bold plan. The one thing I will say, and I know that the feedback that came from PIC prior to our last meeting was we don't want to have any of these targets because there will be a kind of a local allocation of what everyone kind of needs to do, but that it's not a mandate. And so I certainly would invite any feedback. It would be helpful for me as you read through this. I'm sure Councilmember Prince would appreciate that feedback prior to the PIC meeting as well too. But I think all in all, the local impact to us, there's not mandates coming down from it, and that's great. Now, the flip side of this, of course, is this, which I know some members of the task force were a little uncomfortable with, is it's kind of just recommending another committee, right?
Yeah.
The recommendation is that, and I know that's kind of frustrating in some regards to some, but it does at least set up the model. I think we need to get things going quicker. Other alternatives available weren't necessarily going to go at the pace we needed, I think, to get this plan actually started, which is why we're focusing obviously on the first 5 years. The last thing I just want to add on this real quick is I would definitely like to see that if there are legislative recommendations that come out of this task force, certainly that we incorporate those into our legislative priorities as well. I know obviously there were more than just that Doug had listed on there tonight, but I think there may be a few more coming out of this as well.
Go ahead, Ruth.
No, it's good.
Oh. Any other questions from council?
Well, thanks, Ryan. I guess I just want to voice a concern that has been around Renton for a long time, because I go back to the days when Newcastle wanted to take credit, get housing credits for our lower cost affordable housing because they didn't think they had the land for it. I just want to be sure that we do our share, but I honestly believe that with Growth Management Act, we have taken more than our share of a lot of the growth that other cities have not taken and have just sat on their hands. And I'm not suggesting that we don't take what we would consider our fair share, but I just want to be sure that, again, that everybody takes a fair share, and it makes for a better product if it's shared out, and most likely better transportation options for people if everybody takes it. So I applaud you for sitting and doing this. I really do, and I think your explanation to me, for me anyway, was great.
Any other questions from council? All right. Thank
Thank
you,
you.
Paul. Committee of the Whole is adjourned. We will reconvene in 21 minutes as a full council. Thank you.
We got a lot.
I was going to ask the same question.